1 minute ago, Kid Cudi testifies what Diddy did to his home will leave you speechless. It was a cold, rain-slicked morning when Scott Mescudi, known to the world as Kid Cudi, walked into federal court wearing a leather jacket with silver studs, a white tee, and jeans. No suit, no tie. Just defiance and truth. Reporters whispered as he passed. Fans outside strained to glimpse him. Inside, every seat was filled. You could feel it in the air. Something was about to change. Diddy sat stone-faced at the defense table flanked by his attorneys. He didn't look up when Cudi took the stand. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he already knew. What followed wasn't just testimony. It was detonation. That was the first punch. When asked to describe his initial impression of Diddy during their tense hotel meeting in late 2011, Cudi leaned into the microphone and said he looked like a Marvel supervillain. The courtroom chuckled. Even jurors grinned, but Diddy didn't. From that moment, the power dynamics in the room began to shift. This wasn't the slick mogul versus the flaky rapper. This was a man reclaiming the narrative, armed with facts, pain, and a dry wit that cut like a knife. It started with a phone call sometime between shouted and 5:30 and 6:30 a.m. Cassie Ventura, breathless frightened, told Cudi Diddy had found out about their relationship. She needed help, fast. Cudi did what any man with a conscience would do. He picked her up and took her to the Sunset Marcus Hotel, a quiet place. Safe, or so he thought. What he didn't know then was that Cassie had already given Diddy his home address. The reason still unclear. Was it fear, manipulation, loyalty? But what happened next made one thing certain: boundaries had been crossed. Capricorn Clark called him nearly in tears. She was with Diddy, at Cudi's house, uninvited, unannounced. She sounded terrified, Cudi recalled. When he arrived, the damage was already done. Security cameras had been turned downward, their eyes blinded. Gifts, luxury items from Chanel, were ripped open on his kitchen counter. His dog, usually roaming free, was locked in the bathroom, shaking, traumatized. Cudi's voice cracked. He was never the same after that. And neither was Cudi. Damn, are you in my house? On the drive back, Cudi called Diddy. He didn't mince words. Motherfucker. Are you in my house? Diddy's reply was calm, too calm. I just want to talk to you. I've been waiting. But there was no mistaking the undertone, dominance, control, surveillance. Cudi filed a police report that same day. But the system didn't act. Not then. Maybe not ever, if not for what came after. January 9th, 2016. Cudi's Porsche, parked outside his home, was set ablaze by a Molotov cocktail. Burnt metal. A gaping hole in the roof. Melted leather seats. Smoke scars along the frame. Photos of the damage were entered into evidence. The jury leaned forward. Some gasped. His dog sitter had called him. Your car's on fire, she'd said. When he got there, the bottle was still on the ground. Charred. Evidence. I wanted to fight him, Cudi said on the stand. But then I realized this wasn't just personal. It was criminal. Weeks later, the two men met at Soho House. Cassie was there. An awkward triangle of shattered trust. Cudi asked about the car. Diddy shrugged. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Cudi didn't believe him. Neither did the room. On cross-examination, Diddy's defense attorney Brian Steele tried to paint Cudi as a pawn, a drug-using celebrity manipulated by a cunning ex. Cassie played you, he suggested. Cudi didn't flinch. Maybe. But it doesn't change what he did. Steele pressed on. DNA at the crime scene didn't match Diddy. The Molotov cocktail circumstantial. But the jury wasn't buying it. Not entirely. Not this time. Because Cudi had something stronger than forensics, his voice. And after years of silence, he was finally using it. But Scott Mescudi wasn't alone. 3 hours after his explosive testimony, another voice pierced the courtroom, a voice long, buried beneath the weight of platinum records. red carpets, and whispered NDAs. Cassandra Ventura. Cassie entered the witness box with a tremble in her step and fire behind her eyes. This wasn't the pop princess you remembered from magazine covers. This was a survivor with nothing left to lose, and everything to say. Cassie's name had floated through the trial, like smoke mentioned in testimony alluded to in defense, cross used like a pawn between two powerful men. But now, she was real sitting in front of 12 jurors who held the fate of Sean Diddy Combs in their hands. She wore black. No makeup, no glam squad. Just the weight of the truth. And when she began to speak, the entire courtroom leaned in. It was after he found out about me and Scott, she began voice barely above a whisper. That morning, I called him. I had to. I was scared. She recounted the phone call, the panic, the way her voice shook, as she begged Cudi to help her get out. But it was what came next that sent chills through the courtroom. He told me, she said, pausing to gather herself, "You think I don't know where you sleep? You think I don't have people?" Her words hung in the air like smoke from that Molotov cocktail. Cassie described her relationship with Diddy as one of extreme's public glamour, private chaos. She painted a picture of two parallel lives, the perfect partner on red carpets, the controlled woman behind closed doors. She admitted she gave Cudi's address to Diddy. "I didn't think it would go that far," she said, her eyes glassy. I thought if I gave him something, he'd calm down. But he didn't. He escalated." Her voice cracked as she described the aftermath of the break-in. Scott's dog. It wouldn't come out from under the bed for days. I kept thinking, what kind of person does that? She glanced at Diddy. He didn't meet her gaze. "Someone who needs to feel in control," she added. It wasn't just testimony, it was catharsis. Then came the receipts. Cassie's team submitted screenshots, coded messages, burner phone contacts, nicknames used to refer to visits and deliveries. Some jurors raised eyebrows. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The prosecution tied them to a larger pattern: control, intimidation, systemic silencing. A network, not just a man. And, at the center of that web, a name: Sean Combs. Brian Steele rose slowly, a folder in hand, and with it came the counterattack. "Miss Ventura, would you say you benefited professionally and financially from your association with my client? I survived," she replied flatly. Steele narrowed his eyes. "Did you ever file a police report? Press charges? Tell anyone outside your circle what was happening?" "No," she said, "because every time I thought about it, I pictured my mother getting a call that something happened to me." The gallery murmured. A sidebar was called, but the damage was done. Returning to the stand, Cassie pulled a small object from her pocket, a broken bracelet. Thin gold, barely held together. "He gave me this after the first time he hit me," she said, holding it up. "Told me it was to remind me who I belonged to." Even Steele looked momentarily thrown. Diddy remained expressionless. As Cassie stepped down, the courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Silence was louder. In that silence, jurors scribbled furiously. Reporters whispered. One woman in the gallery wiped away a tear. Outside, "Nulture Cassie speaks." Now was trending. Inside, a legacy was crumbling. For over a decade, Diddy had been the architect of a carefully curated myth. Music mogul, fashion icon, family man. But now each piece of testimony was pulling another brick from that facade. And the foundation was starting to buckle. Just as the court prepared to recess, the prosecution requested one final witness for the day. His name wasn't famous. Not yet. But what he had seen, what he knew, would take this story to a place no one expected. His name was Mason Trevors. He wasn't a star, not a chart topper, not a social media icon. He was muscle. For 6 years, he stood in the shadow of Sean Combs, watching doors that weren't supposed to be opened, keeping secrets that weren't supposed to be told. But now, with immunity and a subpoena, he stood under oath. And he was done protecting. Mason stood tall, his build unmistakably ex-military. He didn't look nervous, he looked resolved. They called it the lower level, he said, voice steady. Only 3 people had access, Mr. Combs, one of his assistants, and one tech guy I never got the name of. The court leaned in. What was down there? Asked the prosecutor. A pause. Surveillance. Storage. Some things I wish I hadn't seen. He described rows of servers labeled hard drives and a red-lit room with soundproofing and no windows. No cameras pointed inside. Why no cameras inside that room, the prosecutor asked. Mason didn't hesitate, because even Diddy didn't want what happened in there recorded. What blew the court wide open wasn't the existence of the room, but how Mason accessed it just once by mistake. A shipment had arrived wine cigars. His assistant told me to drop them in the kitchen, but the kitchen lights were off. I figured I'd leave them in the lower fridge. I used the same code I always use for storage. Door unlocked. He stepped inside and froze. There was a couch, black leather. A Ring camera pointed out not in. And on the wall were stills, screenshots. I saw faces I recognized. Some were artists. Some were guests. Gasps rippled across the room. Were you in any of those images? Yes. So was Cassie. So was Kid Cudi. Mason's testimony expanded the story from revenge into architecture. This wasn't impulsive rage. This was design. He explained how guests were picked up in tinted cars, phones collected, then guided through service entrances. Parties that looked glamorous on the surface were rehearsed operations. And the basement. It was the insurance room, Mason said. Photos, footage, audio leverage. Blackmail, the prosecutor asked. I never saw it used, but I knew what it was for. Then came the twist. December 21st, 2011, Mason said. That's when Cassie disappeared for 36 hours. She'd gone silent. No texts, no calls. Her friends didn't know where she was. Mason revealed he'd driven her to a private location, a compound outside of West Hollywood. She wasn't resisting. But she wasn't herself, he said. She was quiet, staring out the window, like she was bracing for something. Did Mr. Combs give you orders? Yes, he said. Keep her off the grid. No one needs to know where she is right now. Brian Steele rose again. You were paid well, weren't you, Mr. Trevors? I was paid to forget, Mason replied. Steele pushed harder. And now you're being promised immunity attention, maybe even a book deal. How is that different? Mason leaned forward. Because I'm not afraid anymore. Steele changed tactics. Did you ever see Mr. Combs commit a crime? No, Mason admitted. But you're implying he did. I'm saying he built a system where crimes could happen and no one would know. The courtroom stirred. Steele frowned. By now, jurors weren't just taking notes. They were reacting. One juror, a woman in her 40s, covered her mouth when the Red Room was mentioned. Another, a young man in his 20s, shook his head slowly during Mason's description of the Leverage archive. These weren't just salacious claims anymore. They were forming a pattern. Outside the courthouse, the narrative was unraveling. News outlets replayed Mason's words on loop. Social media exploded with hashtags Scene to Rebasement Files, Red Room, cheering Combs Leverage. Public opinion, once cautiously split, began to tip. And inside, for the first time, Diddy looked smaller. No longer the untouchable icon, just a man, cornered. Before Mason left the stand, the prosecution asked one final question. Why are you coming forward now? Mason paused. Because she was the first person who looked at me like I could be more than a weapon. And I watched her get used like one. The room went quiet. He turned toward Cassie in the gallery. She nodded. A tear rolled down her cheek. The judge recessed court early. Outside security escorted all major witnesses out separate exits. But inside that courtroom, a storm had begun. Kid Cudi gave the match. Cassie brought the gasoline. Mason, he lit the fuse. Now the fire had found its way to the very heart of Diddy's empire. On day 3 of the trial, the prosecution unveiled their surprise witness, Vanessa Sharp, former vice president of artist relations at Bad Boy Entertainment. Her name had been whispered in lawsuits, NDA settlements, even late-night gossip columns. But until now, she had never spoken publicly. She walked into the courtroom with her head high and a folder under her arm, and then she flipped the script. Vanessa sat down, took a breath, and began with a sentence that changed the energy in the room. "I helped build the illusion," she said. A hush fell across the gallery. I was part of the machine that protected Sean Combs from consequences. I scheduled flights, rerouted calls, paid invoices that couldn't go through normal accounts. I buried red flags before anyone could ask questions. She opened the folder. Here's the paper trail. The documents authenticated by the prosecution and submitted into evidence detailed a network of offshore transactions, hush payments labeled as consulting fees, and a list of aliases tied to burner accounts. Many payments led to unidentified recipients, but several names matched individuals who had briefly appeared in court filings, only to vanish under sealed settlements. "How many people were paid to stay quiet?" the prosecutor asked. "More than I can count," Vanessa said. "And not just women. Men, too. Staff artists, drivers, assistants." She paused. People who saw too much. Then came the most explosive revelation, a closed-door event at a wellness spa in the Hollywood Hills, attended by high-profile guests and VIP clients. Vanessa described being asked to sign a non-disclosure addendum, unusual even for someone in her role. Diddy didn't like surprises, she explained, but he loved control. She testified that after the event, 2 young performers, one male, one female, never returned to work. Vanessa attempted to follow up, but was told by HR to let it go. "You ever see them again?" the prosecutor asked. She shook her head. "Not once." Defense attorney Brian Steele stood already flipping pages in a binder as he approached. "You expect this jury to believe you just turned honest?" "After 10 years, I turned tired," Vanessa replied. "And I turned afraid." Steele tried to paint her as a disgruntled former employee, hinting at disputes over promotions, bonuses, and her sudden resignation in 2020. But Vanessa didn't waver. "I left when I realized what I was helping to cover up." Steele snapped. "Are you saying you committed crimes? I'm saying I enabled them, and I'm here to make that right." Throughout her testimony, Diddy never looked up. Not once. His lawyers leaned in, whispered scribbled notes, but he sat statue still, a clenched jaw, betraying the pressure building behind the facade. This wasn't just a PR problem anymore. This was collapse. Vanessa's most damning exhibit was a confidential memo titled Operational Silence Protocol, allegedly circulated among top Bad Boy staff. It outlined steps for managing sensitive incidents, code phrases, contacts for off-book legal help, and emergency protocols for external exposure. The jury read it line by line. "Is this real?" one juror whispered loud enough for the gallery to hear. Yes, it was. With Vanessa's testimony, the prosecution reshaped their case. This wasn't about a jealous outburst or isolated abuse. It was about a system. One built to protect power silence victims and erase accountability. A corporate structure, weaponized not for music, but for manipulation. One that had endured because everyone assumed no one would ever talk. Until now. During a recess, murmurs spread among the audience. A former choreographer, uninvited, stood near the exit and muttered, "I always knew something was off." A sound tech whispered to a reporter, "I remember that spa night. It felt wrong." The walls of silence were cracking from the outside, too. As court adjourned for the day, the prosecutor teased the next witness, a digital forensic analyst, who would authenticate and explain the data found in the red room Mason Trevors described. But before leaving, the prosecutor turned to the jury. There's a reason we started with celebrity, she said. Because if someone like Kid Cudi can be violated and dismissed, imagine what happens to those without a voice. That night, major platforms pulled promotional material featuring Diddy. Collaborators went dark. A few posted cryptic statements. One simply said, "Believe her." The backlash wasn't slow. It was immediate. And it was spreading. The trial had entered a new phase. No longer about a single victim or even a pattern of behavior. Now it was about an empire, and how much damage the truth could do when the people it crushed finally started speaking. The very next morning, the world woke up to breaking news, not from the courtroom, but from the sky. Helicopter footage first aired on local Los Angeles stations captured a fleet of unmarked black SUVs encircling Diddy's famed Jungle City studios. Moments later, agents in tactical gear swept in. The raid had begun. And with it, the final unraveling of the myth that had protected him for decades. Witnesses reported seeing agents carting out hard drives, recording equipment, and sealed boxes from the soundproofed VIP wing of the studio. The street outside was sealed off. A drone camera caught the moment an agent displayed a signed federal warrant against a studio door before breaching it. The image of that paper became an instant viral symbol, proof that the justice system was no longer whispering. It was kicking in the front door. By midday, federal spokespeople confirmed the raid was coordinated in cooperation with testimony from the ongoing Combs trial. Sources close to the investigation stated the search was linked to digital archives mentioned by witness Mason Trevors and corroborated by executive Vanessa Sharp. A whistleblower from the IT team at the studio, anonymous but verified, shared chilling context with a major outlet. We were told those servers were legacy backups for unreleased music, but they were password protected by someone outside the tech department. We never touched them. They had names, not files. Tiffany, 2014. J-Party footage, Bermuda. Cudi Gate 1, stuff like that. Back in court, the prosecution called in their next witness, Dr. Amir Kaleem, a digital forensic analyst with over 20 years of federal cybercrime experience. He presented mirrored images of 3 hard drives obtained from both the basement archive and studio servers. The contents password-locked folders labeled with first names, dates, GPS coordinates, inside some videos, dozens. One was shown to the court in a redacted audio-muted form. The room froze, a single frame, a couch, a woman seated visibly dazed, a figure standing off frame. Cassie turned away. Kid Cudi closed his eyes. The jurors shocked into breathless stillness. To defend against claims of fabrication or tampering, Dr. Kaleem explained the meticulous digital signature verification process, showing logs that proved none of the files had been accessed or edited since their last metadata entry, some dating back over a decade. One video was timestamped just 3 hours after the infamous spa night Vanessa Sharp had described. Another was logged minutes before Cudi's Porsche was firebombed. "You're saying these are authentic?" the prosecutor asked. "They are," Kaleem said. "And admissible." Brian Steele looked rattled for the first time. He objected, repeatedly. Argued irrelevance, prejudice, lack of foundation. Overruled. Again and again. He turned to Diddy, who finally looked up, eyes wide, mouth set in disbelief. Not disbelief in the evidence, disbelief that it had finally surfaced. For years he'd been the master of the reset headlines, erased payouts, hidden stories denied. Now the cameras were rolling, and he wasn't directing. As news spread, protests sparked outside the courthouse. Survivors of other music industry scandals showed up holding signs. "Silence isn't consent. Heal the house. We believe Cudi. We believe Cassie." Media vans multiplied by the hour. Brands began distancing themselves. One major streaming platform temporarily removed all curated Diddy playlists. A fragrance line announced it was ending its licensing deal. But more than cancellation, what had arrived was confrontation. This wasn't just about reputation, it was about reckoning. Inside, Cassie held a tissue in her lap. She hadn't spoken again, but her posture had changed. No longer a woman bracing herself. Now, a woman watching the tide turn. And Cudi. He leaned forward, hands clasped, as if urging the prosecution to go further, to finish it. In that moment, neither looked like victims. They looked like victors. That was the final question of the day, from the prosecutor asked rhetorically, as Dr. Kaleem detailed a list of 19 names tied to digital archives found on the studio server. Only 3 of them had been publicly linked to Combs in previous legal or industry matters. The rest, blank slates. For now. But that list, the prosecutor said, turning to the jury, isn't just a log of files. It's a map. A map of people who may never have been heard until now. Court ended early to allow the defense to prepare for the next day's witness, a former assistant turned industry whistleblower. Her name had not yet been released. But insiders already knew what she'd bring. Not more evidence. Stories. And in this trial, stories had proven more powerful than anything. No courtroom could contain what came next. On the final day of testimony, the prosecution called their final witness, a woman whose name had never once appeared in tabloids' headlines or viral hashtags. But to those inside Bad Boy Entertainment, she had once been everywhere. Her name was Talia Mendez, former executive assistant, gatekeeper, fixer, ghost. She stepped into court without makeup, wearing a faded blazer and flats. No entourage, no camera crew, just a single folded sheet of paper in her hand. And with that paper, she detonated what was left of Sean Combs' defense. Talia began quietly. I never thought I'd speak. I signed 5 NDAs, was threatened twice, told I'd never work again. She held up the paper, a printout of one of those agreements. The top corner was torn, as if from panic or hesitation. But silence doesn't erase what I saw. She told the court she coordinated all travel for Combs and his inner circle for 4 years. That she handled cleanup logistics, last-minute flights for guests, payment envelopes dropped in glove compartments, car services with no digital trail. I didn't ask questions at first, she said. I just did my job. Until one day, the job broke me. She took the jury back to December 2011, same date Mason Trevors had driven Cassie to the private compound. Talia confirmed she had booked the car under an alias, but she revealed something no one else had mentioned. Cassie wasn't the only person scheduled to be at that house that night. There was another name, G. Michaels, listed as a masseuse, except there was no such person in the network. It was a code name for whom Talia paused, looked at the judge, then whispered, I believe it was for Mr. Combs, the implication he didn't just orchestrate. He inserted himself physically directly into scenes later described as traumatic and coercive. Then she read from the letter. It was addressed to the girl I couldn't help. Written the night she quit in 2020. Never sent. Until now. I watched you leave that house. Your face hollowed your wrists, trembling. I watched you smile at the driver so he wouldn't know you were braking. I should have spoken then. I didn't. But I'm speaking now. By the time she folded the page, 2 jurors were openly crying. The court clerk dabbed his eyes. No objections from the defense. Not one. Because what can you object to when the truth has already broken the room? While court was still in session, U.S. attorneys issued a press statement. Based on the testimony and newly uncovered digital evidence, separate federal investigations had been launched into potential violations of interstate trafficking, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to intimidate witnesses. Sean Combs was no longer just fighting to clear his name. He was fighting to stay free. For the first time in 6 days, he spoke. To his lawyer, to the judge, and then to the court in a moment that wasn't officially testimony, but felt like an unscripted confession. I built an empire, he said, standing. But I didn't know how to stop once it got out of control. No apology, no denial, just exhaustion. The judge instructed the jury to disregard the statement, but it didn't matter. They'd already seen the empire crumble. All that remained was the verdict. It took less than 6 hours. The jury returned with unanimous conclusions on the civil counts: racketeering, harassment, unlawful surveillance, emotional distress. The federal charges would follow in a separate process, but here in this courtroom, the legacy was shattered. Cassie held her breath. Kid Cudi stared at the ceiling. When the final guilty rang out, Talia Mendez closed her eyes and smiled for the first time. Outside, the media swarmed. Social channels exploded, but the people at the center didn't join the circus. Cassie left, silently flanked by her lawyers. No statement. Kid Cudi slipped into a car without looking back. And Diddy. He remained seated, eyes fixed on nothing, as if he had finally seen the man he'd become and didn't recognize him. In the days that followed, collaborators pulled music. Former protégés spoke out. Activists organized panels on abuse within the industry. Record labels scrambled to audit their own archives. But the most powerful change, artists, especially women, began speaking more freely, telling their stories without waiting for permission. Because something had shifted. And not just in a courtroom. At the end of her letter, Talia wrote, "They always say, power corrupts, but silence. Silence does worse. It teaches people how to disappear. Not anymore." Now the stories were being told, and this time the world was listening.